Okay, so what is the venture client model? So there are really two answers to this question. First, what is a venture client? And the second, what is the venture client model, right? A venture client is any organization or person that buys and uses a product from a startup. Right? So you are a client because you're buying and using, correct? Just like you would be buying a product from Apple, right? But if you buy a product from a startup, it's a little bit riskier than buying from Apple because the product may not be certified, it may not be iterated as much, maybe it's not scalable, it doesn't have a fixed price. So there are a lot of risks associated with buying a product from a startup. So it's more of a venture, correct? And that's why I coined the term venture client, because you're buying from a startup. As a startup is more risky, you are more adventurous, correct? The other thing, obviously, that you need to take into account is that the startup, not only the product is riskier, but also the company itself. So the company, it may be a great product, great solution, but it's a startup, and we know that startups, come and go. They have a very high risk of failing and disappearing as a company. So if you buy from a startup, you may not get service 2, 3, 4 years down the line because the company disappears. So that's where the word venture client comes from. And it's important to make that distinction because, you have to differentiate between buying from a normal company and buying from a startup company. And that's where the model comes into play. So based upon the definition of venture client, most every company on earth is a venture client, because most every company on earth is buying or has been buying from startups. Apple, for example, has bought from startups since the inception. For example, there's a story about Apple. Once they were already a public company, they bought from a small startup back then, unknown, but today very known as Adobe. Right? The first venture client of Cisco was HP. Right? So every startup has a story about their first clients or their first venture clients who started buying their products and which may make huge impact on the startup, but also on the client. Now, how do you become a good venture client? How do you scale your activities? How do you make the process of buying from startup repeatable in a good fashion? That's where you need a model. That's where you need to define specific processes to identify which problems startups can solve best, and you need specific tools and resources around achieving that in a scalable manner, so you can, for example, measure the impact of what it means to use that technology. And that's where the model comes in place to become, at the end of the day, a good venture client.